I would probably say that being a leader in a regulatory context is not glamorous, but it's certainly a privilege. And it's a privilege in the sense of leading people who, it's probably fair in many domains in government that people are passionate about the subject matter. It's certainly the case for regulators. They are often there because they are passionate about the area that they are regulating, not necessarily having started as a regulator. So it's a real privilege to work with people that are passionate and dedicated about the areas that you're focused on. And it's really important to recognise that your role in that is as a kind of a steward of those people and what you're trying to achieve. I think the key thing is the relationships that you have with the people that you are engaged with, the regulated parties. Often with service delivery, you're dealing directly with the person that is the beneficiary of the service. With policy, classically the recipient is the minister or whatever. With regulation, you're dealing with a bunch of people, the regulated parties, but you've got to see through that to who the actual beneficiaries of your work are. So the relationship that regulators have with regulated parties is one that needs to be thought of extremely carefully. And I'm certainly on record for talking about the regulatory relationships and the kind of customer concept, and regulated parties not being customers, but also recognising that a regulator, you have to engage with regulated parties in a way that is fair and timely and transparent and effective and all that kind of stuff. But noting that you're working with those parties to influence their behaviour, which is not necessarily giving them the sort of benefit in the way that a customer might expect it. Somebody spoke to me about wanting to be a regulatory leader. The first thing that I do is talk about regulation being in and of itself a professional activity. And I'd probably say that in the context that your previous experience, you may have a PhD in economics, you might want to work in somewhere like the Commerce Commission. That doesn't automatically qualify you to be a regulator in the Commerce Commission. And I think it's important to understand that that regulatory profession is something that sits across other professional qualifications, and to be a regulator that is effective, you have to learn about regulation as well as anything else. Well, I think particularly for people that come from a strong professional background, whether it's in industry or a professional qualification like law or accountancy, it is to switch to understanding that you want to apply those skills and that knowledge as a regulator and not as a lawyer or an accountant or, in my current context, an aviation engineer or whatever. It's important that as a leader you brief yourself on regulatory concepts, understand it at a level that you can engage effectively with your people, not necessarily as a new regulatory manager or leader in kind of teaching them, because you won't be able to, but asking curious questions and testing the work that's going on with a background of understanding, at least at a high level, what regulation really is and what it's about. And to do that, I'd actually advise people to spend a lot of time talking to other regulators across many different domains, understand what they're thinking about, how they're thinking about it, and the issues they're dealing with. The other thing that I'm keen on in two ways is, one, that read a bit. I suppose most people in the regulatory community in New Zealand will have heard of Malcolm Sparrow, and they have probably read The Regulatory Craft. If they haven't, they should have. But then they should also think about that in terms of how do you actually apply that in your own area. And that's one of the very difficult things, I think, in our world, is that there are quite a bit of academic literature. It doesn't necessarily prepare you for practical application of regulatory concepts and activities. I think if you're making a transition either into a leadership role or from a leadership role in one domain like policy into implementation or operations, then the leader that's bringing those people over should make the effort to ensure that a transition occurs. And it's it's too simplistic to say it, but you kind of have to unlearn some things and learn some new things.